So I made a community post asking you guys who you wanted to see Calamity Jane go up against in one of these versus videos, and it seemed pretty overwhelmingly that you guys wanted to see her go up against someone like Chiron, because Chiron is very similar to Calamity Jane and that they're both DPS single target archers, but they can be brought as support type servants, and you can actually double up on both of them and kind of make some disgusting combos. Now, I did also see some people asking for the Santa Altera comparison with Calamity Jane because they're both single target quick archers, but I want to talk about Chiron, and I feel like this is a good excuse to kind of talk about Chiron to some people that maybe just don't know how good he is, because Chiron is very disgustingly good. He's one of those servants very similar to like the ruler free-to-play Da Vinci that we just got, where you can pretty much bring him in any team comp and kind of fill in gaps in, whatever you're lacking. Like if you're lacking a Scotty, you're lacking a Merlin, you're lacking a Castoria, you can kind of just bring this guy and he'll be a nice just fill in the gaps type of support type servant, just because he's very generally good. He's not going to be as good as one of those main supports, but he definitely does fill that, hole in your team comp, and he does a very good job at it. So I wanted to go ahead and talk about Chiron and Calamity Jane. If you enjoy FGO content, I upload these videos every single day, and all I ask for in return is a like on the video and a subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 100K, and it might seem like a long and arduous, maybe even an impossible journey to some, but I think we can do it, right? I think with everybody's support, I think it's definitely a possible journey that we can all go on together. So help your boy out with that like and that subscribe. If you really want to become a channel member, you can click that join button and show your support. I'm thinking about uploading like challenge quest videos or just like random fights that I might do for channel members. So if that seems interesting, or maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think of other video ideas that I can upload for channel members to kind of give some incentive there. So if you have any ideas, leave those down in the comments down below. I'm just trying to like rack my head about what could I do that I could just put up for channel members exclusively. So let me know what you guys would be like. That is something that I would become a channel member for if you were uploading those for members exclusively. But enough of that, let's go ahead and talk about these two. Now, we really don't need to go ahead and talk about the hits because their hits are so similar that I don't really think we need to split hairs being like, well, Calamity Jane has 3% more NP charge per attack over Chiron, but Chiron does have that 0.1% star gen over Calamity Jane, even though Calamity Jane down here has the passive 10% star gen, and then her quick cards, I mean, they're going to be genning massive amounts of stars, because not only are they getting the just passive star gen buff, but they're also getting a buff to their quick performance, which is buffing their star gen ability as well, so she's kind of winning out on that. But I mean, you would expect her to, she's the quick servant, but then you could also say, well, Chiron boy over here has the 5-hit extra attack, so that just makes him infinitely better than Calamity Jane. So you guys can argue about their hits in the comments down below all you like. I really think it's just splitting hairs at that point. It's really not all that important because they're so just crazy similar to one another. I don't think it's worth splitting hairs over. What I think we can actually get into are the skills and how good they are as DPSs and how good they are as supports. Now, I'm just going to go ahead out and say it just flat out. I think Chiron functions better as a support type servant than Calamity Jane. Let me explain why. So Chiron's two main support type skills are his second skill, where he's giving the entire party a 50% crit damage buff, which is Waver's crit damage buff for those of you that need a reference for it. And then he's giving 15 stars for free. Now, if you're rocking double Chiron, that's 100% crit damage to the entire party and 30 stars from them to play around with. And then he's also giving one ally, the main person he's supporting, the person that you want to have shine in your team comp, he's giving them every single card buff by 30% for 3 turns. So it's not the 50% or 30% that like a main servant would have, but he trades that in for just being generally splashable in any team, right? Because 30% is good enough, and it means you can put it on anybody, right? It doesn't matter if they're a quick buster or art servant, they're going to be able to use both of these buffs that Chiron's giving. And then if you have double Chiron, that's a 60% buff. So it's basically a whatever card mana burst that they're primarily using for 3 turns. It's really dummy good. It's a very, very good team comp, right? And I mean, we'll talk about his NP in just a little bit, because his NP is also pretty good as a support type NP. It's not giving direct buffs, but it's doing good things. Let's just go ahead and talk about it. Let me just go ahead and talk about it. This is the main thing that I think it's really good. I don't think anything else down here really matters. I think the fact that even if you're not focusing on Chiron, that his NP is still good enough because it removes enemy defensive buffs. That essentially means, whoever you're trying to make shine, whether you're just rocking him with, I don't know, Achilles, you're doing some master servant weird setup, right? It means that you can always have Achilles go second, and then you can always make sure that there are no defensive buffs in Achilles' way, and that means he's always going to be able to hit them with his full force NP. I think that is insanely good for a support type servant. Plus, you're getting a little bit of extra damage with Chiron's NP, even if you're not buffing him at all. It'll still do a decent bit of damage. So that's why I think Chiron's a little bit better. I think because then we look at Calamity Jane. Her first skill's kind of dead, right? Like, honestly, this skill desperately needs to get buffed. I mean, it's very, very reliant on either having other servants that are lowering attack or, having servants that are giving you like defensive buffs to kind of compound with this. And even with double Calamity Jane, that's only a 20% reduction in the enemy's attack, which, I mean, is cutting it down by a fifth. But again, that's probably not going to make all that much of a difference in a lot of these really, really hard fights. So, I mean, for some people, they might be like, oh, that sounds good enough to me. But in my experience, it's just not good enough. Then we have her second skill, which I'm not going to fault her for. I don't think it's bad, but the problem is if you're bringing her as a support type servant, you're no longer getting this guaranteed, because if you're bringing double Jane, you want to be splashing this on your main servant, right? Because unfortunately, if they like maybe buff her in the future and they make this like a party-wide thing, I think it fixes her up a lot, because then you don't have to worry about giving this to Jane or just missing out on this 20% attack buff. I mean, it may say 80%, but if you've played FGO, you know that anytime you get like a high percentage like this, it's always a lie. It might as well say like 20% or something. I mean, anybody that's used Imperial Privilege or you've gotten like a 70% chance to crit knows that they can definitely fail, and they seem to do it more than you would think that they would. Like the 80%, you're like, oh, that's a 4 out of 5 chance, right? But then it's like, every single time it misses. You're like, what is going on here? This is not what probability says. But at the very least, she's still giving the entire party 10% gauge and is reducing all enemies NP by 1. But again, is that really worth like what Chiron's doing? I mean, maybe you could say that the 10% gauge here is equivalent to the 15 stars, but then you're just like, is getting 30 stars plus AoE crit damage for everybody equivalent to 20% NP? And then I kind of have to waste that if I want to use this immediately. Like, you know what I'm saying? And like, you might miss the attack buff. I don't know. It's just a little too inconsistent. You guys might notice that when I look at servants, I really like servants that are very, very consistent, where like every single time, boom, 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 I know what I'm going to be getting with Chiron. I know that every single time I'm going to be getting this crit buff, the stars, and this guaranteed buff. And I know that every time, as long as their buff is not, the special type of boss buff where it's unremovable, I know that he'll always have me covered, and he'll always allow my servant that I'm buffing him with to just attack cleanly, right? With Jane, I don't have that guarantee, right? And then I also have the potential of wasting these, right? Which I don't like. I don't like when the potential to waste things is there. I mean, obviously there's a skill gap, right, where you're learning how to play the game, where you kind of like are thinking what's the best way to like 3-turn, 4-turn, 5-turn something, or the best way to use your skills. But the fact that like you might be like, oh, I really need to get this NP off, but then I'm going to waste this NP gauge reduction, like it's kind of the Raiko and Jack problem, where they have the mana burst tied to their dodge where you can waste them, and it just leads to scenarios that you should not be in. And I just find it as a little bit of an annoyance, and I have to chalk that as a point against her when comparing her with Chiron. Then we have her big Ooga Booga skill, which it is giving more to Chiron, or giving more than Chiron, my bad. I mean, I guess you could use it to buff Chiron if you wanted. And to also be fair, I think these are both pretty much free. Like, I don't think there's any servant in the game. I mean, well, let me not make an absurd claim like that, but pretty much every servant in the game can gen like 10 stars with one of their quick cards, and then like, I don't know, like a buster card or something. Like 10 cards and a random brave chain should be pretty free, unless you're just doing like arch chains with no crit star gen buffs. I mean, you kind of have to go out of your way to not be able to gen 10 stars a turn. So basically, Calamity Jane should be able to just freely give one ally the buff success rate and the 40% crit buff, which, keep in mind, is less than what Chiron's going to be giving. Chiron's going to be giving 100% to the entire party. Jane, I mean, if you have double Jane, is going to be giving 80% to one ally. So That is kind of a knock against her as well. 20 stars, again, I think is pretty free with like most servants brave chains. Again, as long as you're not doing like an arts buster and then extra attack brave chain, you should be genning 20 stars per brave chain. Again, I think that is pretty free. Unfortunately, I mean, well, I don't want to say unfortunately, but I don't know if the star weight should have been here. Like, I kind of feel like they should have maybe put the NP gauge there. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't think they should have made things like the NP gauge so restrictive, right? When I think this is far more important for her to be able to freely give than this, because then this becomes less of a big deal. Then it's just like, oh, well, I can just give 20% to somebody. But then the fact that they locked it behind the 50, which we'll talk about, is just really annoying. 30 is kind of when we start to get a little iffy as to whether or not things are going to be free. But if you're running like a dedicated quick team, or like you're kind of using her to buff like a quick servant or someone that just has really good stars, and like maybe you're using her to buff someone like Emiya who drops like 500 billion stars on his NP, or you're using them to buff Raiko who drops again like 500 billion stars on her NP. I mean, you should be pretty fine with that, right? As long as you're using them to buff someone that's a decent star gen, or you're using something like double golden catches the carp, where you're starting off with like 100 million stars as soon as you start the battle, you should be fine here. And just, it is nice that she has a targetable evasion. It makes her good as a support. You can keep your main DPS alive, but it is kind of annoying that it's locked behind 30 stars. Again, you could see scenarios where you want to give the dodge to somebody, but just dang it, you only had 28 stars available, or you had a really bad turn last turn where they took 14 of your stars, or your skill refreshed, but what did the boss do? The boss took like 50 of your stars, right? They just sucked all of your stars, of which some of the bosses do tend to do more commonly nowadays. So again, that can be kind of annoying that it's very reliant on stars, but the effects are good, because then you start getting to like 40, giving Pierce invincibility. I will say, like, I'll also make this argument that I think giving this to somebody is better. Well, I don't want to say better than the removing the buffs, but I think it's pretty much as good, right? Because let's say you have a boss that has 20 hits of dodge, or like 20 hits of invincibility, which may sound ridiculous, but there are going to be bosses in the future that have just like crazy stacks of dodges and invincibility, or just redonkulous buffs that are irremovable because they really want you to bring specific servants to those boss fights. And you know, someone like Chiron wouldn't be able to remove those defensive buffs because they're unremovable. But you have Calamity Jane, give them this buff that you can easily get with double golden catches of carp, and you're cooking, right? You just gave them that and you get around that. You subverted entirely. So I do think it can be better in certain scenarios. I will give her the points there. And then obviously giving 20% gauge to somebody is good, but again, the fact that it's locked behind 50 stars is really, really annoying. So okay, I guess then we'll talk about her NP. Her NP, I don't want to say doesn't do anything. It kind of is doing something different than what Chiron is doing, and I just prefer that Chiron removes all defensive buffs as a support, as opposed to Calamity Jane lowering the enemy's defense and their quick resistance, although that is giving a lot of damage if you're using her to support, say, a quick servant. And I mean, God forbid you get like double Calamity NP and then your main quick servant's NP, because then you just nuked their defense, nuked their quick resistance, and you just bombard them with that third NP. Plus that third NP is like starting at baseline overcharge 3, and most offensive servants have a decent overcharge effect. So I don't want to like fault her there, but I just value what Chiron's bringing. The consistency that he has, I just highly value. And while I really like Calamity Jane a lot, I think she's fun to use. If I'm going into more difficult content, I'm probably going to reach for Chiron before I reach for Jane, right? Not to say that Jane is bad or anything, but I just value the consistency and just like the generally better buffs that Chiron is giving. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Do you guys think I might be capping or something? Do you think Calamity Jane is better than Chiron or something like that? I think it gets a lot more competitive depending on what they do with skill 1 over here, and if and when they buff this third skill, if they make some of these just like AoE buffs. Because sheesh, bro, if we're talking about like these just all become party-wide buffs, we're in a whole different ball game. Because then the fact that it's more restricted by stars, I think becomes infinitely more worth it, right? Because then it's like the whole party's getting crit damage. The star weight, I don't know what they're gonna do with that. Maybe the person you target with it still gets the star weight, and then everybody else gets the rest of the buffs. But then like a party-wide evasion, that's always good. That's literally better Harp of Healing, because Harp of Healing only gives you evasion for a hit. This gives it to you for a turn. That's insane. Giving the entire party the Pierce Invincibility effect is crazy, and then a 20% battery for everybody. That's obviously really nutty. And then I don't really know what they want to slap on here. Because she already kind of has NP control with this skill, I'm hoping they maybe give her like skill seal for a turn. I think that could be just really useful. Maybe bump this up, this right here, to maybe 15%, because I think they know that people might bring double Calamity Jane. As rare it is, they know that there's going to be like some big brain people that are like, I'm going to bring double Chiron, or I'm going to bring double Calamity Jane. They know there's people out there that stray away from the traditional supports and make broken team comps. And so if they made this like reduce all enemies attack by 20%, dude, you bring double Calamity Jane and you just neuter the entire enemy's party's attack by 40%. It's a little broken, but maybe that's what they gotta do. If they do something like that, again, I'll be singing her praises all day long, you know? Then I think it becomes really competitive between the two. But as it stands right now, I'm on Team Chiron when it comes to the DPS servant that can also function as a support type servant. I know we talked a lot, or just pretty much predominantly, about them being support type servants, because I think that's what people are generally interested in. If you want to know who I think is better as a DPS, I'm still probably going to lean a little bit more towards Chiron. Although Calamity Jane, if you're selfish with this buff right here, I think actually functions really, really well as well. So again, probably leaning more towards Chiron, but that might also be might be me trying to subconsciously not be biased, because I really like Calamity Jane. I've been telling you guys that I'm going to be skipping the Space Ishtar banner, summon for Scotty, but man, the more and more that I interact with Calamity Jane, the more and more I want to summon, not for Space Ishtar, but for Jane. So, you know, maybe I'm just being like subconsciously, you know, trying to suppress a bias that I have, and I'm trying to be as fair as possible, and that's why I'm saying Chiron's a better DPS. Now, don't misunderstand. I think Chiron is a better support, right? That has nothing to do with the joke I just made. But as a DPS, you know, I lean a little bit more towards Chiron, but I might lean more towards Jane if my bias starts to flare up a little bit. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. You know, again, if you enjoyed the video and everything, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments what you guys think I should offer for channel members, and make sure you type out something that it's like, yes, if I saw this, it would be something that I would think is worth a channel membership, because I kind of want to know what you guys think would be worth that. And again, this general idea that I'm floating out there is I'm like, maybe I'll do like challenge quest videos with different team comps and everything. So I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace, late guys.